The 80-year war cycle. The mathematical inevitability of 2025 history does not move in a straight line. It moves in a circle. To the untrained eye, the events of the last few years, inflation, pandemic, geopolitical tension, appear as random chaos. They seem like a string of bad luck. But if you zoom out, the chaos dissolves. A distinct, rigid pattern emerges. We are not living through a random series of unfortunate events. We are living through the mathematical closing of a cycle. Historians call it the seculum. Economists call it the long-term debt cycle. But the simplest name is the 80-year war cycle. It is a clock that has ticked with frightening precision for centuries. Subtract 80 years from today, and you arrive at 1945, the climax of World War II and the destruction of the old order. Subtract another 80 years, and you arrive at 1865, the conclusion of the American Civil War, a conflict that nearly erased the nation. Subtract 80 more, and you are in 1785, the turbulent aftermath of the American Revolution. This timeline is not a coincidence. It is a biological constant. 80 years is the length of one human life. It is the exact amount of time required for a civilization to forget the visceral horror of the last Great War. When the generation that remembers the trenches dies, the immunity fades. The fear of conflict is replaced by the romance of conflict. We are currently standing at the very end of this timeline. The crisis phase has arrived. Here is the mechanism of why history is repeating itself. The debt supercycle war is rarely about morality. It is almost always about accounting. The primary driver of the 80-year cycle is the accumulation of debt. At the beginning of a cycle, like in the 1950s, debt is low and growth is high. A new order is built. But as decades pass, the system becomes corrupt. Governments overpromise. The populace overconsumes. By the end of the cycle, the liabilities overwhelm the assets. In 1941, just before the U.S. entered World War II, sovereign debt was skyrocketing. The Great Depression had decimated tax revenues. The system was insolvent. Today, the numbers are nearly identical. The U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio has breached 120%, a level only seen once before, World War II. History teaches a cold lesson. Empires rarely pay off their debts. The mathematics make it impossible. There are only two ways to clear a ledger of this magnitude. The first is default, which leads to immediate collapse. The second is inflation, which is politically unpopular. Unless there is a war. War is the ultimate economic loophole. It allows a government to seize total control of the central bank. It allows for infinite money printing under the guise of national survival. It allows the state to restructure the entire economy without the consent of the voters. In the 1940s, the war allowed the U.S. to liquidate its Depression-era debts through massive inflation and industrial mobilization. The current global economy is trapped in a debt spiral. A great reset is mathematically necessary. War provides the cover to press the button. 2. The Thucydides Trap. The second gear in this machine is geopolitical. It is the friction caused by the transfer of power. The Greek historian Thucydides famously wrote, "It was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable." This is the Thucydides Trap. In the last 500 years, there have been 16 instances where a rising power threatened to displace a ruling hegemon. 12 of them ended in war. In the previous cycle, the fading power was Great Britain. The rising challengers were Germany and the United States. The friction between the old world and the new burned Europe to the ground. Today, the actors have changed, but the script remains the same. The United States is the fading hegemon, financially overextended and culturally tired. The rising challengers are the BRICS nations, led by China, who control the world's manufacturing base and raw commodities. We are witnessing the transition from a unipolar world, one master, to a multipolar world, many masters. History shows that power is never handed over voluntarily. It is taken. The conflict has already begun. It simply hasn't gone kinetic yet. 3. The economic siege. We tend to think of war as soldiers and missiles. But in the 80-year cycle, the shooting is the final step. The war begins with trade. In the late 1930s, the United States didn't bomb Japan initially. They cut off the oil. They froze assets. They weaponized the flow of commerce. Japan, strangled by sanctions, felt they had no choice but to break the siege physically. Look at the headlines of 2024 and 2025. We are seeing the exact same pattern. The weaponization of the SWIFT banking system, the bans on high-end semiconductor chips, the rise of tariffs and protectionism. This is the deglobalization phase. The complex web of global trade is being severed. Nations are hurriedly stockpiling gold, grain, and energy. They are insulating their economies. You do not build a fortress unless you expect a siege. 4. The internal fracture. There is one final ingredient required for the fourth turning: internal division. Before an empire fights an external enemy, it almost always fights itself. In the 1860s, the U.S. was torn apart by the moral and economic divide of slavery. In the 1930s, Europe was fractured by the ideological war between fascism and communism. The center could not hold. Today, the West is more polarized than at any point since the Civil War. The population is living in two separate realities. The trust in institutions has evaporated. For a ruling elite, a divided population is a liability. It is impossible to govern a people who hate each other. But there is a cynical cure for internal division: a common enemy. External conflict is the oldest tool in statecraft to unify a fractured nation. When the people are fighting each other, the leader points to a threat on the horizon. The drumbeat of war drowns out the sound of domestic failure. The conclusion: the forest fire the year 2025 is not the end of the world, but it is likely the end of the world as you know it. The 80-year cycle is not a mistake. It is a feature of the human condition. It functions like a forest fire. A forest fire is destructive, yes. It burns the canopy. It kills the saplings. It turns the landscape to ash. But the fire is necessary. It clears out the dead wood. It destroys the parasites. It returns nutrients to the soil. Without the fire, the forest creates no new growth. We have lived through a long summer of easy money, cheap energy, and relative peace. That season is over. The winter is here. The structures built in 1945, the UN, the IMF, the dollar standard, are old and brittle. They are ready to burn. The coming years will be volatile. They will be dangerous. But they are inevitable. The cycle does not care about your portfolio. It does not care about your politics. It only cares about the math. The pattern is repeating. The only question remains: are you prepared for the reset?